Shelby Foote, author of Stars in Their Courses, the Gettysburg Campaign. Where did you get that title?
It comes from the Bible. The stars in their courses fought against Sisera. When Deborah, whoever it was, drove the tent peg in his temple, freeing the Jewish people from his tyrant, she explained that he had been led into this terrible tragedy that had happened to him by the stars. In other words, fate had brought him there. And the title ties in with Robert E. Lee being led into defeat of Pickett's charge by success after success after success until finally fate decided to hammer him down, and they did at Pickett's charge.
Gettysburg was fought when?
It was fought on 3 days, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of July.
What year?
1863, almost in the middle of the war.
And this is called the Modern Library of the World's Best Books.
Right.
Why did you decide to do this book? I mean, is this the only one you've done in this series?
Yes, it's the only one in that series. I'm on the advisory board of the Modern Library, and they asked me what of mine I'd like to have there. And this is a chapter from my 3-volume Civil War narrative, and it is a central chapter of the central volume. So it's sort of, if I might say so, the capstone or the arch of that whole narrative of the war.
And why did you want to pick that?
It is more a complete story in itself than any other section. This narrative is woven in and out of other things, but this chapter, better than any other that I know of, tends to stand by itself and could be a book of its own.
Could someone buy this book and not have read your others and be comfortable reading this?
I think so. It's one of the few instances of an excerpt of 90,000 or so words that you could do that with out of that narrative.
Over what span of time did you write your 3-volume set?
I began it in 1954 under a contract with Bennett Cerf at Random House for a short history of the Civil War. And I sat down to outline this short history and saw that I would be simply writing a summary and wouldn't be interested in doing it. So I wrote and told them at random that I'd be willing to go whole hog, spread eagle on the thing, 3 volumes. And there was some hesitation, I presume, but in about a week I got word to go ahead. And I went ahead for the next 20 years. I finished it in 74. I began it in the spring of 54 and finished it in the spring of 74. And I did not do anything else during that whole time of any import. I didn't write a novel. I didn't do any of those things, just worked on the war.
Where were you living in 1954?
I was living in Memphis. I had just moved there from my home about 150 miles downriver in Greenville, Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta there. And I'd moved up to Memphis, and one of the reasons I accepted this job offer to write the Civil War thing was that I had just finished 5 novels. And they were more or less related to each other, and I was looking forward to writing another set of 5, but I thought it might be nice to take some sort of vacation to break the time between the 2 of them, and I was going to spend this year or maybe year and a half writing this Civil War piece. And the next thing you knew, I was in it up to my neck and happy the whole time. I have a strong belief that novelists have a great deal to teach historians. About plotting, about character drawing, about other things, especially the concern about learning to be a good writer, which many historians don't bother to do. And I was happy the whole time. I never felt really different writing the history from what I'd felt writing novels.
The 11-part series, I think it's 11, correct me if I'm wrong, on the Civil War on public television, the Burns series, your face is on there a lot.
Right.
How many hours did they tape?
It was kind of strange. I had 2 sessions at my house with Ken and his crew, and I took them to Shiloh, and I took them to Vicksburg, and we did a little filming at Shiloh and a little at Vicksburg, but most of it was done right there in the sitting room at my house. And I think he had maybe 4 hours of tape, out of which he took what he wanted.
How has that changed your public well, I mean,
that's what it did change. Is my public thing. It vaulted me into the public attention, which had been minuscule before that, and I had all kind of reactions to that happening. But it sold books. That's the glorious thing about it. The war had come out, stayed in hardcover, but it also came out in Vintage, which is a softback subsidiary of Random, and it took off like a skyrocket after this television program.
Up till that program, do you know how many copies were sold?
It sold rather well. It did well. It got good reviews for all 3 volumes and was selling well. But it really took off after the television.
Any idea how many?
Volume 1 is in its 21st edition now, I think. It's a huge number.
Would that mean hundreds of thousands of books?
Yes, for the 3 volumes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what's happened to you since you've been seen by so many people?
I get this strange star quality reaction from people, which I find rather unpleasant, really. Crossing an airport or going somewhere to dinner or something, there are people who come over and say how much they enjoyed the war. I haven't yet had anyone come up to me and take the trouble to say they didn't enjoy it, but they do tend to come over and say.
How do you deal with it?
I tell them that I'm glad to hear it, and one reason I'm so glad to hear it, aside from personal vanity, is I'm always pleased to know that I might have had something to do with people beginning to understand the American Civil War, which I think is enormously important for every American citizen.
Somebody told me that you didn't like to sign books.
I don't sign books except for close friends, and I do it for 2 reasons. One is I think it makes it mean something that way when you do sign it, and the other is I'm saving myself and an awful lot of other people a lot of trouble not fooling around that autographing business. I think it's ridiculous.
When did you decide to do this?
Early on, way back when I was writing first novel, I did it that way.
Do you find people get mad at you because you won't do it?
Occasionally somebody gets mad, but mostly when I tell them why, they say, I understand that. Yes, that's right. They even approve of it. Yeah.
When did you first get interested in the Civil War?
Any Deep South boy, anyhow, and probably all Southern boys, they've been familiar with the Civil War as a sort of thing in their conscience going back. I honestly believe that it's in all our subconsciouses. This country was into its adolescence at the time of the Civil War. It really was. It hadn't formulated itself really as an adult nation. And the Civil War did that. And like all traumatic experiences that you might have had in your adolescence, it stays with you the rest of your life. Certainly in your subconscious, most likely in your conscience too. And I think that the Civil War had the nature of that kind of experience for the country. We now recognize, anybody who's looked into it at all, realizes that it truly is the outstanding event in American history insofar as making us what we are. The kind of country we are emerged from the Civil War, not from the Revolution. The Revolution provided us with the Constitution. It broke us loose from England, made us free, made us men. But the Civil War really defined us. It said what we were going to be, and it said what we're not going to be. It drifted away from the Southern, mostly Virginia influence, up into the New England and Middle Western influence. And we became that kind of nation instead of the other kind of nation.
What would have happened if Stephen Douglas had won the presidency in 1860?
I can't help but think, I usually don't like what ifs and so on, but I think that if Douglas had been elected, it simply would have postponed the problem. I think the problem was there. Seward called it an irrepressible conflict, and I think it was there, and I think it would have been there while Douglas was there, or certainly after Douglas left. All these splits were going on. The Whigs were dissolving or had dissolved. There were issues that were so bitter between the abolitionists in New England and the fire eaters in South Carolina and various other places in the South. I'm almost willing to believe that with all our genius for compromise, there still wasn't any way to settle this thing except by fighting. The most regretful thing is that the thing went on for 4 years with an incredible savagery. That's the great shame. There was bound to be a fight, but for it to be the fight that it was with literally more than 1 million American casualties is That need not have been. Something should have stopped it before that.
How many men fought on the Union side and how many on the...
There's a good deal of argument about that. I've forgotten the exact figures. There probably were 1.5 million Union and possibly as many as 800,000 Confederates. Maybe those figures will hold.
How many died?
The deaths total about 650,000. Two things might bring home to you how savage it was. All the American wars combined. Now, this is somewhat unfair because I'm only talking about American casualties. In those other wars, I'm not including the foreign casualties. But more Americans were casualties in the American Civil War than in all the wars we'd been engaged in. The Revolution, the War of 1812, the Mexican War, all rolled in together. Not as many casualties as there were at Shiloh. The first great battle of the war lasted 2 days. There were 25,000 casualties there. And that's the total casualties of all the American wars up to there.
What was Greenville, Mississippi like?
Greenville, Mississippi just barely existed at the time of the Civil War. Where I'm from is called the Mississippi Yazoo Alluvial Delta. And it was only settled along the Yazoo and the Mississippi. The whole interior was one great swamp filled with alligators and moccasins. And it wasn't until after the Civil War that they put the railroad in and could get the trees out and then dig the drainage ditches that it became habitable. But Greenville was shelled during the war. It was a little town on the river, and it was shelled as a diversion to Grant's attack on Vicksburg.
You were born in 1916?
1916.
What were your parents like? What did they do?
My father came from a long line of illustrious Mississippians. His grandfather, my great-grandfather, commanded the Noxubee Cavalry at Shiloh. And his father was a planter there in the Delta. And he expected to live a life of ease, mainly involving dice shooting and cards and whiskey and flying around. And his own father short-circuited that by pushing his fortune across the poker table and lost his plantation. So my father had just married my mother and scarcely knew what he was going to do with himself, and her father got him a job as a shipping clerk at Armour and Company there in Greenville. And in the next 6 years, somehow or another, he changed everything about himself and wound up managing Armour branches in Pensacola, Jackson, and had just been transferred to Mobile, where he was the big head man in the southern region, and he died of septicemia from an operation on his nose. I was just short of 6 years old. So I often look back on it. If he had lived, it's pretty clear he would have wound up in Chicago with Armour and Company, and I'd have been a Chicago kid, going to prep schools and living in some suburb. And I consider that a great deliverance. I'm sorry I had to sacrifice my father to do it, but it's strange what accidental things like septicemia can do to people's lives.
Do you remember him at all?
I do. It's a good test for me of how back people generally can remember. I remember very almost clear snapshots when I was like 4 and 5. But I'll tell you a strange thing about memory. It fades. I'm 77 now. Your memory fades, and I will remember my father very clearly, and then it'll fade. And then about another 5 years, when it's almost faded out of sight, I'll have a very vivid dream of him, and the memory's back fresh again in my conscience. That's a strange phenomenon to me.
About your mom?
My mother never remarried, and I was an only child. And her devotion to me meant so much to me because I was a kid who stayed in trouble all the time. I was editor of the high school paper and dedicated myself to giving the principal a hard time. And when it came time for me to go to college, I applied at Chapel Hill for admission and received a letter back saying, we're sorry, there's no place for you here. The principal had taken the trouble to write him a letter saying, do not let this boy in your school under any circumstance. But I got in the car and drove up there and got in line for registration. When I reached the desk, they looked in the file and said, "They told you not to come." And I said, I know you did, but I didn't think you meant it. Now, this is 1935. There were empty rooms and dormitories and everything else. And they said, "All right, since you're here." Yeah, so I went to school there.
Why did the principal feel that strongly?
Because I'd been giving him a hard time as editor of the high school paper.
How did you get interested in even writing?
That's always hard for a writer to say. I'm sure my interest began in an interest in reading, which then was translated into an interest in writing. How did this fellow do this? I can remember in a Sunday school prize or something when I was about 11 years old, I won a copy of David Copperfield. Up at that time, I'd read the Bobbsey Twins and then Tom Swift and the Rover Boys and Tarzan. But since I got this as a prize, I decided I should read it. And I found a world that was realer than the world I lived in. Unlike these Tarzan and other books, this was a whole nother world, and it was a world of art. I couldn't have defined it as that, but one thing, I knew David Copperfield better than anybody I knew in the real world, including myself. And I said, my God, to myself, this is a whole world. I didn't then read all of Dickens or start becoming a serious reader until 3 or 4 years later, but I remember vividly having that reaction to that book, David Copperfield. I think most writers probably have that experience.
What year did you get out of college?
I only went 2 years. The war was heading up. Hitler was on a rampage, and I knew we were going to get in it, and I wanted us to get in it. So I came home to spend the year that was left getting to know my homeland before I got my head blown off in the war. And then I joined the Mississippi National Guard when Hitler went into Poland. This was by way of telling him he couldn't get away with that. And the Guard mobilized in November 1940. We went down to Camp Blanding and began basic training.
Did you go overseas?
Yeah, I went to Officer Candidate School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, in, I think it was January of '42, right after Pearl Harbor, and finished there. Came back to Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and was cadred out to Camp Bowie, Texas, in Brownwood, near Dallas and Fort Worth, and then went overseas and joined the 5th Division, which had been in Iceland since way before Pearl Harbor, and ran crossways of a colonel on the staff there who's well known for somebody you should not get crossways of. And he lay for me and finally got me on falsifying a government document. It was a rule that you could not use a vehicle for recreation beyond a distance of 50 miles. And we were 54 miles from Belfast. So it was a common practice among us to write 50 miles. Our battalion was outside that 50-mile radius. And that was the charge of falsifying a government document. And I was court-martialed and sent home. I stayed home. I worked on a local desk at Associated Press for about 6 months, and I couldn't take it any longer, and went down and joined the Marine Corps. And I was in the Marine Corps for a year, and they dropped the bomb, and the thing was over, and I came on home. The Marines were funny about that. They said, my fellow Marines went through boot camp, Parasol, and everything, haven't been a captain in the Army. And they said, you used to be a captain in the Army, you might make a pretty good Marine if you work at it hard. I enjoyed it. I liked the Marines.
So if I figure right, in 1954, you were about 37, 38 years old when you started writing about the Civil War.
Right.
When you went to Europe and you were in the Marines and in the Army, did you know anything about the Civil War then?
Yes, I carried with me, in my baggage, I carried GFR Henderson Stonewall Jackson. I had Freeman's R.E. Lee with me as often as I could lug it around. And I spent my spare time, even then, figuring out what happened during the 7 days and drawing maps and things. It always fascinated me.
You say in this book for the Modern Library at one point that when Robert E. Lee was up north, people would stop him from the north and get his autograph.
Right.
How come?
There was a general admiration for Lee. It's curious, in the Civil War, the men who were most hated were not very dangerous men. They were men like Butler and God knows who you'd name on the southern side that they hated so much. They were not much killers. The real killers, like Grant and Lee, were enormously admired by the opposite side. There's something very strange about that, but it is strange.
When you started really thinking about writing when you were 37 or so, had you been to a lot of Civil War sites?
Yes, it was a sort of hobby of mine. I was going back and forth to New York 3 or 4 times a year, driving in those days, up US 11 through the Shenandoah Valley and all that. And I would stop at battlefields all along the way and go out of my way to go to them just to see what they felt like. In visiting battlefields, it's very important that you go at the same time of year, if possible, on the very anniversary of the battle, because for places so different other times of year, to understand the Battle of Shiloh, if you went there when it was fought in early April, you would see what it was like. If you went there in February or later on in July, it would be a different feel. You wouldn't understand the way the new growth of leaves choked everything in, so nobody knew what direction north, south, east, or west was. So you get that thing, and you get the weather, you get the soil, you get the coloration of things, you get the true feel of it.
You said earlier that the Civil War defined what we were going to be,
right,
what we were not going to be.
Right.
What are we?
Well, the Civil War included emancipation, and it was immediately followed by true emancipation. I mean, the Constitution freed the slaves, not just those who were in rebel hands, as Lincoln's proclamation claimed.
Before you go any further, define the word emancipation. What's it mean?
Emancipation means the setting free of people who are in slavery. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation did not free anybody. What it did was it declared that all slaves not then in territory occupied by the Union would be free as of January 1st, meaning if I can reach out and touch you, you're not free. If you're beyond my reach, you're free. Well, they didn't immediately say, I am free in March somewhere. They couldn't. But the real emancipation, Constitutional Amendment freeing the slaves, freed all the slaves. And slavery is a huge stain on us. We all carry it. I carry it deep in my bones, the consequences of slavery. But emancipation comes pretty close to being as heavy as sin. They told, what is it, 7 million people, you're now free, hit the road. And there was a Freedmen's Bureau, which was a sort of joke. There were people down here exploiting them. 3/4 of them couldn't read or write, had no job, no hope of a job, no way of learning a job even. And they drifted back into this peonage situation under sharecropping, which was about all they could do. And to this day, we are paying and they are paying for this kind of treatment. The emancipation, I don't mean it should have been a gradual emancipation. I mean there should have been true preparation to get these people ready for living a kind of life. They were free and should have been free all along, but they were not prepared for living in the world. They'd living under conditions of slavery which kept them from living in the world.
You say it also defines what we were not going to be, and what does that mean?
It means the loss of the so-called Southern virtues, some of which are very real. A man's word is his bond. The business of not insulting each other with impunity. Some of these things are very small, but they weigh large in the human scale.
You moved to Memphis, which is in the South.
Right.
Why did you choose to leave Greenville to go to Memphis? What was the real reason?
I never left home when I came to Memphis. Memphis is the capital of the Mississippi Delta, even though it's in Tennessee. It's the city. If you're in the South Delta, you go to New Orleans. If you're anywhere above the Middle Delta, you go to Memphis. I don't think there's been a season of my life that I hadn't been in Memphis with my mother or one of my aunts and uncles up there shopping and everything. People went up there for everything. Men to buy guns and shoes and things, and women to buy clothes. It's just, this was before there were malls and designer dealers with designer clothes in small towns. So excursions to Memphis were frequent and for shopping purposes.
You have a family?
I was just my mother and I all the time until right after the war. I was married, got divorced, and then remarried again after I moved to Memphis. I've been married now for 36 years, I think it is.
Children?
One child, a son, 32 years old.
What's he do?
He's a photographer, and getting to be a good one.
Did he take any of the photos of you that we see ever?
No, he takes photographs of me, but for some reason or another, that brand of nepotism I haven't been involved with.
Where was this photo taken?
That was taken at home, but it was done by a photographer from Denver. His name is Larry Shirkey, and that's a cut from a larger photograph.
Do you purposely have all your photos taken without a smile?
I think that I do. I share that with Abraham Lincoln. There's only one photograph of Lincoln that has a little bit of a ghost of a smile, and that's the last one. The one that was taken just shortly before the assassination, and when he knew the war was won.
Because if you go back and look at your 3-volume series, there are different pictures on them.
Right.
At that age. And when did you consciously decide to have always a serious look?
I don't think so. I think it probably, a battery of psychiatrists could figure it out, I think, but no, not consciously. For one thing, I don't like having a picture made, and that's one reason I'm frowning, saying I don't like this experience.
When did you write your first novel?
I wrote my first novel, I said I left school to come home and wait for the war to start. I wrote the first draft of my first novel during that period while I was waiting for the war to start in 1939 and 40. Then when I came back from the war in 45, I sat down and revised it, and it still was my first novel. It was published by Dial in 1949.
What was it?
It was called Tournament, and it's a story about a planter in the Mississippi Delta, about his rise and fall, very loosely based on my grandfather's life, although he died before I was born, so it wasn't out of personal acquaintance with him.
You've written how many novels?
I've written 6 novels, 5 before the war and 1 since.
How many nonfiction total books?
This is my only nonfiction, this Civil War narrative.
Do you like one over the other?
No. I suspect I like to think of myself as a novelist because that's what I was for most of my life, and that's the way I thought of myself, and I haven't changed. And it pleases me when someone tells me what they like best is my novels. But no, I face the fact that I probably am more apt to be known for writing this 3-volume history than anything else.
By the way, since your fame from television, have your novels sold any?
Yes, they have. Vintage has brought them out in softback, those that were out of print are back in print, and they do quite well.
One of the things that in one of the notes in one of your books I found was that one of your favorite, or your favorite historian is Tacitus, is that the way you pronounce it? Who was he?
Tacitus was a Roman historian right after the birth and death of Jesus. And he is, above all, a writer. Tacitus' style is just a joy to be involved with, whether in their original Latin, which I can barely stumble through, or in a decent translation. It's very hard to get a good translation of Tacitus. A man named Broadrib did a pretty good one. And there's something about him. He writes about high-placed scoundrels for the most part, and he takes that Roman Empire apart. Some historian said about, I guess it was Claudius, that he was a successful emperor, hard-working and everything else, and then, alas, he fell upon the pen of Tacitus, which always tickled me as rude. But I like Tacitus very much. The other historians I like a lot.
When were you introduced to Tacitus?
Probably during high school. Probably was when I first encountered it. I took Latin in high school. We didn't have Tacitus, so Tacitus is too hard to read. You do Caesar and then finally Virgil, but you don't get to Tacitus until you go on from there.
And also you mentioned the Peloponnesian Wars.
Right, Thucydides.
Is there any relationship between what you read there and what you have found about the Civil War?
Yes, a great deal. I'll tell you something interesting stylistically. There's a strong belief, I think it's utterly true, that Gibbon, in writing The Decline and Fall, was strongly influenced by Fielding's Tom Jones. There's also a strong belief that Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War was strongly influenced by his reading of Aeschylus and Sophocles. I believe that the artists are out front and have a great deal to teach historians about a good writing and dramatic composition, which I consider the best history to be. And Aristotle said, in criticizing Greek drama, that first you learn how to write well. A good sophomore high school can do a surprisingly good description of a sunset. Then you learn to draw characters that can stand up and cast a shadow. And the last thing you learn to do is plot. That's the skill that comes last, if it comes at all. And that is where I think historians neglect a huge advantage. I think history has a plot. You don't make it up, you discover it. It's there. Oscar Wilde talks about life imitating art. I have noticed that when a man dies, no matter at what age or by what cause, his life then has a beginning and a middle and an end. And sometimes his death explains his youth. Good friends of mine who were killed in the war spent their youth exactly as if they knew they were going to be killed over plastic. It's a very strange business, but that's art taking over, insisting on giving a thing form when it seems to be formless. And I think that when you supply that form, and mind you, I'm not talking about superimpose it, I'm talking about discover the form, it makes that a very exciting reading experience.
If you pick up your Civil War series or this book, you just, well, there's actually, in this book, there's a little introduction about Shelby Foote, tells us about you.
Right.
But your other books, you just start right off.
So does the narrative.
Yes.
There's no preface saying, I owe my debts to this and that and the other. That all comes at the end. It starts, and in the full narrative, the sections, I never called books chapters in my novels, but in the history I was careful to call it Chapter 1, Chapter 2, emphasizing its kinship to the novel. There
are no footnotes and no bibliography.
The subject, after 100 years, is well enough known not to need footnotes, the Civil War. Footnotes are extremely useful to other historians, and I was writing for historians' enjoyment and I hope instruction, but mainly I did not want to interrupt this narrative with this bunch of footnotes down at the bottom of the page where your eye leaves the story every now and then to glance down at the footnote. I thought that the footnotes would cost me more artistically than they would gain me in academic respect.
Who's Ralph Newman?
Ralph Newman is a Civil War enthusiast from Chicago and one of the leading persons to make the Civil War into the American consciousness through a thing he had called the American Lincoln Bookshop there in Chicago. He was one of the founders of the Civil War Roundtable in Chicago, which I think was the first of the roundtables. They, during this, long before this period of the huge popularity of the Civil War, were working away at it and doing very interesting stuff.
The reason I bring it up is that you also mentioned in one of your books, your comments at the end, that he came out with a bibliography that made you didn't have to do it.
He and his friend Pete Long published a separate bibliography that covers everything. And I said, if you want to know where I got my books, go to Newman's bibliography. That's where I got it.
350 books in the Civil War.
About that number was the working library I had near my desk at all times. I worked from printed sources entirely. I did not get into the archives and dig around among manuscripts.
Have you read all those books?
Yes, I had. I read them and read them with pleasure, most of them.
One of the other things I noticed in reading this is that you'll just start with a name. I mean, there's not an explanation of where this person comes from and all this.
Right. What I do is I work at development. I don't stop the story to tell you who somebody was. I release things about his life as the story goes along. I've got a long way to go, you see. I've got 1.5 million words there, and I take my time. You don't find where Lee courted his wife until the Battle of Fredericksburg. He's looking through his binoculars across the Rappahannock at an oak tree in the yard of a house over there, and that's where he courted his wife. And it picks these pieces up as you go along until finally, I hope, you get to know these people the way you do get to know people in real life, find out little by little about them instead of just 3 pages of biography.
Where have you written all these books physically?
I wrote the first volume on the exact western city limits of Memphis because it's on the bluff overlooking the Mississippi River. The second volume was written on the eastern limits of Memphis, which Yates Road was then the eastern limits of that. And the third volume was written where I live now, right in the geographical center of Memphis. All 3 volumes were written, every line of them there in Memphis.
In a house or an office or what?
In a house. I've always worked in a room where I usually sleep, so that I sleep near my desk, and the typewriter's over here. And there's something about it. When I go somewhere else, like in the summer, go down on the coast or something, I can't work away from home. I'd have to stay there for 2 weeks before I could start writing. I'm not like, say, D.H. Lawrence, who could write anywhere. In fact, never had a home. But to me, it's a very deliberate thing. 500 or 600 words is a good day for me. I write with a dip pen, which causes all kind of problems, everything from finding blotters to pen points. But it makes me take my time, and it gives me a real feeling of satisfaction that I'm getting where I'm going.
What's a dip pen?
It's the kind you used to see in post offices all the time when you were a boy. I would love to find one of those ink wells they had in post offices. They had a spring in them. When you pressed down, it would wet the pen point, and then when you lift it out, it would close it again so the ink didn't evaporate. I can't find one. I'm absolutely certain that right here in Washington, there are 5 million of them in a warehouse somewhere, but I can't find one. But a dip pen, you have to dip it in the ink, write 3 or 4 words, and dip it again. And it has a real influence on the way I write. So different, not only from a typewriter, but from using a pencil or a fountain pen.
What do you do with it after it's written? The 500 words every day.
I set it aside to dry, then copy it off a typewriter, copy it, make a typewritten copy of it, and then read copy on that until finally the day is over and I'm all the way satisfied with it, and I put it on the stack, make a clean copy and put it on the stack. That way I don't have to engage in something that to me is a particular form of heartbreak, which is revision. I don't do that. My best friend in life for 60 years was Walker Percy. He had exactly the opposite. He said if I knew what was going to happen next, I wouldn't be able to write. I wouldn't be interested in writing if I knew what was going to happen. I'm the other way.
And so you're never edited?
No, there's no real need. I may take out a comma or put in an and or something, but very minor stuff. You know.
Do you have this arrangement with your publisher?
Yes. My editor at Random House for 35 years now has been Bob Loomis. He's a good editor. And our arrangement is that he will encourage me. He will do everything in the world to make me feel that I'm doing well and this and that and the other, but he doesn't mess with the text.
Do you know many authors that have this kind of arrangement?
William Faulkner had it. I've seen a Faulkner proof. Somebody presumed to read the galley proofs and make a correction of something. And Faulkner scratched it out, and the next time he got down to one, he saw another correction mark, and he wrote, "God damn it, leave it alone." That's the way I felt about it, too.
How long does it take you to write the 500, 600 words a day?
A long time. Most writers I know work all morning and then are free in the afternoon and evening. Some few I know work at night. Very few writers I know work over 4 or 5 hours a day, which is a long day for a writer. I work in the morning 3 or 4 hours and then go back in the afternoon and work 3 or 4 hours. It's because I'm a slow writer, I have to do that much to mount to, I write about 100,000 words a year, year in, year out.
Do you keep all of these facts and figures in your head?
Mostly in my head. Particular quotations that I want to be sure to keep up with, I'll write on a piece of paper and stick on a piece of beaver board that's in front of my desk so I won't forget to get it. But mostly I carry this in my head. But by way of preparation for this, I did something that I think anybody would find useful. I got large cardboard posters and drew columns down it, and then put the year 61, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'd had diplomacy, military, political, other things. And so that at a glance I could tell what was going on at that particular time. And that's where the plotting came in, so that you weave the diplomatic situation and the political situation and the military situation all into a narrative.
Who are you, I hesitate to ask this because I'm not sure which way you'd go with it, but because you might not even like the question, but who are your favorites? Who are your favorite characters after writing all these words about the Civil War?
You mean Civil War characters?
Yes.
It's easy to state who your favorites are because there are many people's favorites. Robert E. Lee, U.S. Grant, Stonewall Jackson, Tecumseh Sherman. But I have some favorites that are grievously neglected. One of them is an Arkansas general named Patrick Ronyan Claiborne from Arkansas, and he probably was the best division commander on either side. And in his day, he was killed at Franklin about a year before the end of the war, but in his day he was called the Stonewall Jackson of the West and well known and adored by his men. And he's been largely forgotten today. He's buried right there at Helena, where Crawley's Ridge comes to the Mississippi. And I'm very fond of Claiborne, and I got the same reaction at Claiborne's death that his men got. I was greatly saddened to lose him. You get a great fondness for these people, or a severe dislike for them. And if you have a dislike for them, you lean over backward hoping not to let it show. I'm sure it does.
This is about, this particular book is in this Modern Library series.
Mm-hmm.
It sells for $13.50, I think.
Right.
What is this series? And you're on this board.
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, I'm surprised you would ask, because to me, being as old as I am, the Modern Library was what I grew up with. It was my introduction to everybody, Gertrude Stein, William Faulkner. Everybody was in the Modern Library, and that's where you went if you wanted to keep up with that, plus the classics. We were talking about Tacitus and Thucydides. I read them in the Modern Library. The Times being what they were, but they were 95 cents a copy in those days. Not nearly as well printed or as handsomely bound as now, but 95 cents you could get all of Thucydides.
Well, ask him, because it seems like there's something new going on, because
right.
You see these now in a lot more bookstores.
Right.
New, you know, covers.
Right.
And what is happening? And you're on the board. What's the name of the Maya Angelou and Daniel Borston and Christopher Cerf? By the way, is he related to Bennett Cerf?
He's Bennett's son. Mm-hmm.
And Shelby Foote's on here, and Barton Gregorian from Brown University. Right. Used to run the New York Library, and Edmund Morris, the biographer of Ronald Reagan and Theodore Roosevelt, and Arthur Schlesinger, and William Starman, and Gore Vidal.
Right.
What do you all do?
We meet, and each has books that he would like to see in it, and we all decide whether they should be done. The head of it is a young woman named Susan DeSessa, who's an excellent editor, and we decide what should be in there, and sometimes decide what should not. And it's a growing list, and a good one. All the old titles are available too. The Chaucer, for instance, is coming out in a month or so.
Who owns it?
Beautiful book, Random House. It is to Random House what, well, Knopf has lately bought Everyman's Library, which I'm sure you remember. Many publishing houses have these things. It's a combination of classics, ancient classics, and sort of modern classics too.
When I was growing up, I remember seeing Bennett Cerf on television.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what the show was, like What's My Line or something like that.
Yeah, What's My Line?
Was that it?
Yeah.
Is he still alive?
No, Bennett's been dead about 7 or 8 years now. He was a very likable man, and not many people realized, because he was such a punster and so forth, what a good editor he was. He shook up the whole publishing business in New York with Random House. He started it on a shoestring and drove it right to the top. He got Proust. He's the one who got hold of Proust. He got Ulysses, Joyce's Ulysses. It was Bennett Cerf who did that. He did a lot of things. From the books that you've written about the Civil War, and from your appearance on the Civil War series, have you learned anything new about the United States and the people's reaction to it? The biggest change I've seen is in the racial problem, the blacks. And some of it I regret very much. Quite the opposite of the Jews in the case of the Holocaust. The blacks seem not to want to be reminded of history, seem not to want to, in this Disney project that was announced, we will show you what it was like to be a slave. Whereupon a great outcry went up. We don't want to see that kind of thing. Almost the opposite of the Jews having Holocaust museums and all kinds of things. I regret that. I think they ought to celebrate their past the same way the Jews did about bondage in Egypt. They're not ashamed of it. They say, we came out of it. We conquered it. And I wish there were more of that. The Civil War, there's a great compromise, as it's called. It consists of Southerners admitting freely that it's probably best that the Union wasn't divided. And the North admits rather freely that the South fought bravely for a cause in which it believed. And that is a great compromise, and we live with that, and that works for us. We are now able to look at the war with some coolness, which we couldn't do before now. And incidentally, I very much doubt whether a history such as mine could have been written much before 100 years had elapsed. It took all that time for things to cool down. When I was a grade school boy in Mississippi, I knew obscene doggerel about Abraham Lincoln, left over from my parents and grandparents. Yankees were despised. When one of them was so unfortunate as to move to Greenville, Mississippi, he was despised. All that stopped. All that's over now. And the great compromise obtains. And I wish my black friends could do the same thing. The Illinois senator who didn't want the Daughters of the Confederacy in Richmond to have a Confederate symbol, not the battle flag, just a Confederate symbol on their stationery, got her fellow senators to disallow it. I do not understand that. That's a violation of the compromise, for example. And it's an arousal of bitterness. But she, along with a great many others, do not want to be reminded. She has every right to want to hide from history if she wants to. But it seems to me she's trying to hide history from us, and that's a mistake.
What do you think of Abraham Lincoln?
The first word that I have for Abraham Lincoln is genius. There's never been a man function the way Lincoln did. He had never occupied anything resembling an executive position before he came here to be president. He knew almost nothing about the office. He didn't know how it ran. He didn't know about departments like the Treasury and so forth. He had done a term in Congress, which familiarized him with that. He was very active in politics. The Lincoln-Douglas debates show that a man knew a lot about government. But the actual executive job, he learned on the job. And he was just a miracle at it. He was a true genius.
We are covering a reenactment of the Lincoln-Douglas debates this summer, and another person that I want to ask you about in that context is Stephen Douglas.
Yeah.
And popular sovereignty, an issue we've discussed a lot here.
Right.
What do you think of that idea?
Well, Douglas is an interesting man because he had a profound influence on history if he didn't do but one thing. He ran for office. Up to then, no man would run for the presidency of the United States. You couldn't say, I want to be president of the United States, or I should be president of the United States. Nobody would say a thing like that. It was too presumptuous. You sat back and other people said you should be president. Douglas said, I want to be president. I should be president. Others talked about their theories and everything, but Douglas was the first to campaign. Now, today they campaign like mad, and they do nothing but campaign for 2 years before the election. But it was unthinkable before Douglas for anybody to campaign. Douglas came south. He said, he told his advisors, we have to go south and try to swing this thing, heal this break. It didn't succeed.
Do you have any sense of what impact the Lincoln-Douglas debates actually had in those days?
I'll tell you one impact it had. It kept Douglas from being president of the United States, and it made Abraham Lincoln president of the United States when he asked Douglas that thing. You always have to wonder whether some particular thing that Lincoln does is done by accident or mistake or through this kind of genius. The firing on Sumter is a case, the decision to reinforce Sumter. He either thought the South was going back down, or he thought he was going to provoke a civil war. There wasn't anything else that could happen from doing that. So did he blunder into it, or did he have enough foresight to see 4 years later there was going to be a reestablished Union? That's too much to ask him to have done that, but did he really provoke a civil war doing that? Well, during the Douglas debate, he posed a question to Douglas, where if Douglas answered yes, he would win the election. If he answered no, he would lose the presidential election 2 or so years later, or whatever, however many years it was. And he had him hoist on his petard there. And Douglas gave the answer that won the senatorial election, but would lose him the presidential election.
Was the Civil War inevitable?
I think that it was necessary. I do not believe that those differences could have been settled without bloodshed. The question is the horrendous amount of bloodshed needed. That was not necessary. That could have been stopped at some point, God knows. But there apparently were differences so profound between the abolitionists of New England and the Fire Eaters of South Carolina that dragged the rest of the country into this conflict that I'm inclined to agree with Seward, who called it an irrepressible conflict.
From what you know now and your own political philosophy, if you had a choice and you lived back there, which side would you have been on?
There's absolutely no doubt about it. I'm from Mississippi. I would have been on the Confederate side, right or wrong. I would have fought with my people.
Why?
Because they're my people. It would have meant the end of my life as I had known it if I fought on the other side. It would have been a falsification of everything I'd lived by, even if I opposed it. No matter how much I was opposed to slavery, I still would have fought for the Confederacy. Not for slavery, but for other things, such as freedom to secede from the Union.
Is there still a difference in the way people who live in Mississippi think than, say, the people in Illinois?
Much less than my boyhood, far less. In my boyhood, and I'm old enough to go back to before radios being common, you had radios in towns where there was electricity, but you remember, I mean, you must know that before REA, there wasn't any electricity in the country. Some few people had Delco generators for electric lights and everything, but the name Roosevelt was always Roosevelt. You never heard it, you see. He was always called Roosevelt, and it carried on down. Now there's been an homogenization of accents and voices. I don't speak exactly the way a New Englander does, but I speak a lot closer to it now than I used to, or than my people nowadays do. I remember breaking up a zoology class at Chapel Hill talking about earthworms. They never heard anybody say earthworm. It's a kind of New Orleans accent.
Do you have any other books that you're writing? You say you write 100,000 words a year. What do you write about?
I write about the Mississippi Delta. All those novels are concerned with that. It's my homeland. It's what I know. I don't have to do any research. It's all in my experience. I enjoyed very much doing the research and getting to know these people well enough. I felt no different working with facts that I got out of documents than I did with facts, so-called, that I got out of my head. They're both facts. You have to be true to them. A good novelist is true to his facts, as a historian is to his. It's true you can't give Lincoln the color eyes you want to. They were gray-blue. But there they are. They're gray-blue, and you deal with them.
You going to write any more nonfiction?
I don't think so. I don't believe I will. An occasional thing. I recently wrote an introduction to Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage, and rather enjoyed doing it. There's about 10,000 words or so, but I'm a novelist, is what I am if I'm anything.
How often are we going to see you in the public spotlight from now on?
I don't know. I suspect less and less and less and less.
Why?
It's too disruptive. I was talking about my work habits. It also includes working 7 days a week. if I stop, the steam goes out of the boiler, and I have to spend another 2 days building up a head of steam. So that stopping is very bad. I'm actually unable to work if I'm going somewhere and doing something every 14 days or something. I would never get anything done.
When we were talking earlier about your work habits, I want to ask you what you're like to be around when you're writing.
I don't know, because I don't allow anybody around while I'm writing. My wife manages to live with me, and my son and our dog, but I like to be let alone when I'm working. I see these Hollywood movies where the man gets up in the middle of the night and dashes off a few thousand words, and his little wife comes in to make sure he's comfortable and everything. That's all foolishness. There'd never be anything like that. In fact, I'm privately convinced that most of the really bad writing the world's ever seen has been done under the influence of what's called inspiration. Writing is very hard work, and knowing what you're doing the whole time.
And so what kind of a stretch do you go that you're in that writing mode?
A month or so, then take some time off, take a week, go somewhere, rest up, enjoy yourself, come back to it. This doesn't mean I don't spend my evenings socializing, having fun with friends, go out to dinner, all that kind of thing. I do.
You have a note in one of your books that says, "Thanks to my friends that allowed me to spend an evening without talking about the Civil War."
Right, right.
When you're not talking about the Civil War, what are you talking about?
Talking about the latest gossip of what's going on up the street there, and how somebody getting along here, and general politics on the national scene. It's a writer's like anybody else, except when he's writing.
This is what the book looks like, the Modern Library series. And our guest has been Shelby Foote, author of the Civil War and 6 novels. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I enjoyed being with you.